Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening. My name is Shireen Taufik, and I am the co-chair of the Outreach and Events Committee, the committee that's organizing tonight's event. And I'm also a proud RPCV from Guatemala. I wanted to welcome you all and let you know that I'm supporting the production of today's event, along with Christina Kanka, who's also an Outreach and Events Committee member. We wanted to thank you so much for joining tonight's Extraordinary Women Speaker Series featuring Director Carol Spahn, hosted by Women of Peace Corps Legacy. And our discussion will be moderated by Jody Olson, who is the co-president of WPCL and a former Peace Corps director herself. At Women of Peace Corps Legacy, we're a community of several hundred of those with an affiliation to Peace Corps, whether it's volunteers, staff, supporters, or host country partners. And we further the professional and personal development for members and others in our Extraordinary Women Speaker Series. We highlight successful women who have learned from and given back to the Peace Corps communities around the world, like Director Spahn. So we're going to start tonight's event with a brief presentation about the legacy of women in the Peace Corps, and then we're going to have our moderated discussion with Jody and Director Spahn. And then don't worry, at the end we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box or wait until we start our Q&A. So without further ado, I will introduce Jody Olson, who's the WPCL co-president and tonight's moderator.
Welcome. It's wonderful to see you all. I want to do a little shout out to Donna Fehrenbach, who was a Peace Corps volunteer with me, let's just say a few decades ago. And except for one time, Donna, I haven't seen you in however many of those decades are. So thank you for being here. We're celebrating Women's History Month. And as part of that, the extraordinary women that we have worked with and know as part of Peace Corps. And that's really what Women of Peace Corps Legacy is about. So first slide, the Women's History Month in Peace Corps, as you see, it was started by Jimmy Carter. I would like to think he thought of it because of his mother, Lillian Carter, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in India from 1966 to 1968. Actually, she was in Ron Cheddar's group. Ron Cheddar is a former Peace Corps director. And I'm varying from script just a tad, but I have a Lillian Carter story because she's such a famous, extraordinary woman. I had a chance to be in a car with her for an hour and a half, just she and me in the back seat. And I'm still pinching myself that that opportunity came. She talked a lot about her Peace Corps background. And she talked about when she was preparing in training in Chicago. And of course, she needed to get a 2 in language like everybody else. And she worked for her 12 weeks really hard. And it came to the time to test her. And the 2 testers, the 2 lovely ladies, as Miss Lillian said, came to her and said, Miss Lillian, it's time to test you now for your language. And so we would like you to take 5 minutes and talk about your experience that you think you're going to have in India. And so she said to me, she put her hand on my knee and said, dear young lady, she said, I started counting to 50 in the language, whether it was Hindi or another language. And I counted really slowly. And at the end of the 5 minutes, I just got to 50. And the 2 ladies, the 2 people testing me said, oh, Miss Lillian, that was lovely. Oh, you're good. We didn't understand a single word you said, but you can go. And then she said, when she was there about 5 months and she would go into the clinic, all the women would come in and say, good morning, y'all. Good morning, y'all. Good morning, you all. And Miss Lillian said, I knew why I was a Peace Corps volunteer. We have wonderful, outstanding women that have been connected with Peace Corps in a lot of different ways. And with that, I want you to just note down at the bottom that back in those early days in 1966, as I remember personally, 2/3 of all Peace Corps volunteers were men. And I was really struck that all those years later, when I came in as a Peace Corps director, it had been just reversed. And so women's leadership is really taking on an extraordinary role in today's world. And we're proud that Peace Corps is playing such an extraordinary role doing so. Next slide. I would like to just share very, very briefly the 7 women of Peace Corps, 7 women Peace Corps directors that we're so proud of. The first being Carolyn Payton in the late 70s, who could have been actually the first female country director, in addition to becoming the first female director. And she had an extraordinary reputation in mental health and was on the faculty at Howard for her career outside of being Peace Corps director. Next slide. Lorette Rupee is the longest serving Peace Corps director, and she was raising 5 girls during her 8 years as Peace Corps director. And she was just extraordinarily humble and gracious to everyone as she juggled those children 8 years in extraordinary Peace Corps time. Lorette saved Peace Corps in 1982, when part of the Reagan administration wanted to take Peace Corps back under action. It was half in action and half out of action at that time. And action, yeah, which is now AmeriCorps, but in action. And it was her personal drive that was able to get Congress to change the legislation. And with that, Peace Corps not only stayed half out of action, but became fully independent as an agency. And she risked her position as Peace Corps director under the Reagan administration to do that because she believed so strongly in Peace Corps. Next slide. Elaine Chao. Elaine Chao was Peace Corps director in 1991. And as we all know, she's an immigrant from China. And during her time, I was her chief of staff. During her time, Peace Corps went into the Baltic nations, and she played an extraordinary role in keeping Peace Corps strong and entering more countries of the former Soviet Union, as well as laying the new seeds for Peace Corps going into China. And as you see, Elaine, following her time as Peace Corps director, has served 12 years as a cabinet secretary, probably more than any other single cabinet secretary because she served in 2 different cabinet positions. Next slide. Carol Bellamy, who I think many of you know, in addition to being Peace Corps director, she was the first RPCV director from Colombia. And in addition to what you see, she for many years was head of UNICEF and fought very strongly to end women's sexual exploitation. Next slide. Carrie, who I think almost all of you know, is also an RPCV from Samoa and is currently the executive director of Global Communities and doing an extraordinary job there. She was, as I mentioned, in Samoa with her husband, and she served 8 years as deputy director and director. Next slide. You all know me. I was in Tunisia serving with my husband, and I did a bunch of other things. Let's move on to the next slide. Carol Spahn, who we're going to honor tonight as the current Peace Corps director. I want to say just one quick thing. Carol was also a volunteer in Romania with her husband, served for 5 years in Malawi, and then in the Africa region before becoming Peace Corps director. But the story that takes me from me to Carol is that when the former Peace Corps directors get together and got together on the stage when I was director, we all had in our hand, virtually, the national treasure that we call Peace Corps. And we have this opportunity to take the treasure that we're given, cherish it for however long we're there, and then gently give it to the next person. And I think, as everyone knows, my treasure was just a little bit not tainted. It was just a little rusty because of having to evacuate all 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers. And one reason why I am so proud to, and I'm going to get teary-eyed here, one reason why I am so proud to be here and to honor Carol tonight is because of Carol, we've tidied up this treasure and it's shining. And I feel that I can be handing her a shiny treasure. So I'm so grateful to you, Carol. We'll come back to you in just a second because I have one more slide. I wanted to honor one other outstanding RPCV woman because we have hundreds and thousands of them. But I've known Donna Shalala for many, many years. Seeing her for the first time, actually, when she was finishing up being the head of the University of Wisconsin, when my son was graduating, getting his master's degree. And I watched her up on the stage. She's chancellor. And there she was, rearranging the chairs, fixing the mic, making sure that everybody on the dais was comfortable. She was just in there working, making everybody else comfortable. And Donna, as you know, was a Peace Corps volunteer in Iran. And she felt so grateful she could take her Lebanese heritage and serve in Iran with a lot of what the cultural comings and goings that represented. She also has been president of 3 universities, University of Miami, Hunter College, as well as, what was the third one? Oh yeah, University of Wisconsin, and was a congresswoman for 2 years. So when we think of who we are and all the ways that Peace Corps shapes us, I wanted us to do a very special shout out for Donna Shalala. Now let's go back to our program for tonight. And I want to formally introduce Carol Spahn. Carol?
I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Good, Carol. Wonderful to have you. And again, congratulations on last evening with the Williams Award, and just extraordinary for Peace Corps. As I said before, I just forgot one note, that the last 3 Peace Corps directors have been women. And all 3 of these last Peace Corps directors who were women served with their husbands in the Peace Corps. Mm. And so both Carol, you and Carrie and me, we all served with our husbands. So welcome, Carol. And I could give you a long introduction, but I pretty well did it earlier. So if you don't mind, let's just launch in, because I took a little more time than I should have. And the time belongs to you. It doesn't belong to me. So here we go. You ready?
Ready.
All right. With seeing and understanding women leaders, women Peace Corps leaders, including yourself, how do other women leaders help shape you and pave the way for you in your leadership?
Wow. Well, I'll start with you, Jody, because I watched you lead the organization through an incredibly challenging decision, and how you really cheered everyone on through what was, I can only say, a traumatic moment in our history, but a moment when we were all hands on deck, all coming together for a common purpose. And it was powerful. So it was powerful to see both how hard it is to make those decisions, how you need to be bold, even when it's a hard decision to make. So bold doesn't only go with the big decisions, the fun and happy ones. You know, there can be bold decisions that are challenging. And you know, I really enjoyed watching you and your leadership of the agency during that time, and learned a lot from you. And I think as I look back across my life, there are different female leaders that, you know, really inspire you in different ways. And I'll go to Sarah Gerwin, who works at the Peace Corps now, and she was a volunteer in Romania. And I've told her this story. We both stayed on an extra year. I worked for GE Capital, and she was working with one of the big consulting firms that was supporting this small bank that GE Capital had purchased, and I was working at. And the GE Capital team came in and they had this strategy discussion. And I was just, little old Carol, right, in this meeting. And Sarah pulled me out afterwards and she said, "You need to speak up. You know more than you think." And that has always stuck with me. And I credit her to this day for being that voice in the back of my head in those moments when you're kind of nervous and you're not sure if if you lean into the moment or if you let it go by. And really learning to trust my gut in those moments and, trust myself in those moments has been really powerful.
I really appreciate that. And I hopefully that we'll all remember, speak up. We tend to let our voices say, "Oh no, do I really have the right to speak up?" So thank you for this story. It means a lot. Staying with your Peace Corps experience for a moment. In addition to that, what is a moment or two as a volunteer that you took away that has really helped shape you now?
It's hard to, really point to one moment because there's this cumulative impact of moments that when you go back and reflect on it, I think the biggest skill that probably any volunteer learns, and that I certainly learned so I was post-communist Romania. So it was 4 years after the fall of communism. And for those of you who, grew up in that era, there were all kinds of perceptions and stereotypes and understandings of what it meant to live under a communist regime. And, so you go in with those perceptions and stereotypes, whether you want to or not, right? You have these perceptions. And I think that whole experience taught me to be curious and rather than judgmental or, anything else or make assumptions. I think every one of us has a story of assumptions that you make, that you're really embarrassed later that you got wrong. And I'll give you a very simple example, of our cross-cultural training taught us about the art and the history and everything else of Romania. But, we had some challenges ordering food in restaurants. So we would order food and we would order, a piece of meat and, something else. And they would bring us bread and salad and French fries and charge us for all of those things. And we would fight it because we were Peace Corps volunteers and we didn't have any money and we, didn't want to get ripped off. And it took us 6 months to figure out that was just the way it was. That was just the way that things happened. And we were so indignant. And so I think that now anytime I'm feeling that indignant self-righteousness, I have to step back and say, like, what's really going on here? Because, at our root, we are humans, we have similar needs and wants, and we want to be seen and heard and understood. And when you approach something with curiosity, you don't end up in those very embarrassing situations where you only find out later just how wrong you got it.
And I think, taking back from that humility, and just observe and let it be and learn from it.
Yeah.
Well, and you've been carrying that forward. And
yes. And I will say, Jody, there's one other part of that. And that is, there's this there's sort of the accept and observe and be curious. And then you learn over time when and how to push back.
Yeah.
If there is a moment, and I say this in the context of times when I felt I wasn't being heard, or maybe there was a situation where, you know, my contribution wasn't being valued in the way that I thought I had something to bring to the table. So that you aren't just curious, right? You're curious, you seek to understand, but then you stick up for yourself when it's, you know, not a cross-cultural moment. It's a, I need to step up and own this space. And it's a delicate balance to walk, and you make mistakes along the way. And I think you just also have to own those when you make them, but don't let the moment pass you by either.
No, I think you just hit the heart of a lot of the issues of a woman, you know, being in a leadership position, but being in a team position. And when is it respectful? When is it humble? When is it time to speak? How do we speak? How do we use our voice? We're being judged in different ways than often men are being judged. And what does that mean? What do we learn? It's hard.
It is.
I mean, you're really bringing it home to me. It is really hard.
It's very hard. And I think that, you know, for me, what always helped was having a basis on which to assert myself. And I took a great cross-cultural negotiations course, and we had to practice, you know, some of these things and really, you know, think about what evidence we were bringing or how we were negotiating a particular situation. And there was a situation where I was, you know, in a finance role. So my background was accounting and finance. And the board asked me to step into an executive director role temporarily. And I had young kids. I had taken this position as a, you know, part-time position. And I said, look, I'll do this, but I can't do that job and my old job at the same time. So I'm just going to lean into this, and I'm going to take this job, and we're going to fill the other job behind me. And if you find someone else to take this position, then, you know, so be it. That's fine. And I said, okay, well, that sounds good. And, you know, I know that you are part-time. We'd like you to up your hours a bit, and, you know, we'll pay you a little bit more. And being the director of finance, I knew how much my predecessor made. And I said, okay, you're hiring me to do this job, right? I said, yes. I said, do you want me to do the full job? I said, yes. I said, well, then I would like the full salary for that job, and I will do what it takes to get it done. And they said yes. But it was, you know, had I not asked and not known and not been willing to advocate for myself, I would have been doing two jobs, you know, for the same salary. And, you know, and that was sort of expected. And I certainly grew up in, you know, a family that really values hard work, and, you know, we do the right thing, and servant leadership, and all of those things, which are really important. But that doesn't mean that you have to accept a situation that's not going to work for you and your family.
I really appreciate that when it's time to step up. And I like the way you went through the conversation, because you were gentle about it, but you were firm.
Yes.
Maybe that's how the line gets walked, gentle and firm.
Yes. Yes. You know, it's a challenge.
Yes, but it's that wonderful way and that wonderful smile in part that you give while you're firm.
Yes.
Let's go to the present time. You know, as you noted in the beginning, that Peace Corps has gone through a lot of changes, and to put it mildly, COVID brought a lot of changes that none of us had anticipated or expected. So I would love for you to take a moment or two and talk about, where is Peace Corps now? Well, we know it's in Washington, D.C. and in 51 countries and 1,100 volunteers. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Last night. But with that, where is it? How is it doing? How is it doing? And how do you see the next year, 2, 3 years as it rebuilds? In the rebuilding, what is it going to look like?
Sure. Well, that's a loaded question on many different fronts. And I hope that some of you were able to join the Connect with the World session on Tuesday. And if you were not able to, I'd encourage you to go and look at it, because we walked through some of the visioning. But what I will say is, it's been a journey over the last couple of years. And I imagine most of the people on this call served in the Peace Corps and know that at any given time, with the number of volunteers coming through the system, it's a well-oiled machine, but a machine that is, working with humans. And, so you never know what any one day might bring in this vast, beautiful morass of humanity we call Peace Corps. And so there really wasn't ever time, and I say this as a country director, to really step back and say, all right, we're going to really work on our systems, or we're going to do our record keeping, or we're going to do any number of things that you should do but can never get to. So I think what we tried to do, and under your leadership started this, Jody, was really just to say, let's shore up everything we can shore up. Let's contribute in every way we can to the COVID response in countries, so that we can, really keep our staff fresh and engaged and motivated. And let's be the strongest Peace Corps we can possibly be when volunteers come back. And there were several systems that were well underway, when you departed, Jody, that we were able to just put energy behind and get across the finish line. So I think a lot about the programming piece that had been in the works for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, this comprehensive system, starting with logical project frameworks developed from the ground up with host country nationals and volunteers and partners and counterparts, that then we're very clearly identifying outcomes and all of those things. What is our unique niche? And alongside of that was a revamp of the reporting systems. So you have a reporting system that's now tied to the grants, that is more user-friendly, that incorporates these logical project frameworks. And then we went through a process of, training, design, alignment with volunteer competencies. So you're saying, diversity, equity, inclusion is a core competency for Peace Corps. Well, here are the competencies we're looking for. Here's how we're going to train to that. Here's how we're going to evaluate. And here's how we're going to continuously evaluate through service, through the entirety of service. So here is this beautifully comprehensive, aligned system with built-in reporting, functions where eventually a volunteer will be able to get a dashboard and will be able to report back to communities and to government partners in unique ways. That is a beautiful thing that is rolling out now. And we talk a lot about some of the security incident, systems and, some of the great groundwork, to really lean into and push forward on our trainings and support systems around sexual assault, and a lot of work done with our teams around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we used this time. I said last night that, everybody I've talked to said they worked harder than ever during COVID, to both revamp the systems for COVID, but also to get all of these new systems and procedures in place. So that's sort of the where are we now. So the beautiful thing that comes out of this is, with logical project frameworks and everything loaded into this system, I asked the question, how many of our project outcomes and indicators target youth? They were able to run a report and they said 80%. 80% from the ground up, government partners and communities asking us to work with youth. This is the largest generation of youth in history, 90% of whom live in developing countries. And it can result in a demographic dividend, or it can result in mass unemployment and social unrest. And this is what's happening big picture. So we are looking strategically, using strategic foresight to say, what is coming down the road? How is it going to affect us? That in the United States, colleges are, the number of college students is declining, right? So how do we put all of these things into a system and say, okay, we're being asked to focus on youth. This is our core business. It's what we're good at. We know that. So we're building on our strengths. And then let's say, all right, how can we not just teach youth in a secondary school? How do we link them to opportunity? How do we get them into a pipeline through other programs, right? Some might be through ours, but some might be through other programs, because all of the development agencies are looking to localize. And Peace Corps is local development. I feel like this is our moment to shine and to step up and really bring the voices of young people and others in the furthest reaches of communities to the table in a unique way. So we are at this point of really building on those strengths, making sure we, retain all of those things that make Peace Corps magical, and lean into all of that so that we can expand our impact even more. And that is around youth. It's around youth leadership, opportunities for side-by-side service, opportunities to support host countries in creating their own youth service programs. And a lot of that has been done over the years, but we're trying to lift that more systemically. We're looking to expand some of the certification opportunities. So TEFL certification has been a thing for a while, but how do we again lean into that and say, what if every volunteer and every counterpart got a project design and management certificate, right? So this is all long-term trajectory, sort of building off of our strategic plan, but building this holistic picture where you can say, some countries might be in a place where they only need Peace Corps response or only want Peace Corps response. And others might be in a completely different place where they're trying to build up their own, local volunteer network. So to do all of that, and I'll get to the sort of less sexy part of it, to do all of that, we need to have really efficient systems. We need to standardize all of the things that we can, that are back office, that are easy, that will help us streamline and modernize some of our basic functions. And a lot of it's done, but we have room to grow on that so that we can really get more customized on the programmatic side and more responsive, because the other piece of it is that the pace of change is just going to keep increasing. So we have to be creative, we have to be adaptive, and the virtual service program that you launched, Jody, is just one of, I hope, many tools, but that really change the game, right? It changes how we function. And we're seeing that right now in Ukraine. So we have 18 virtual assignments in an active war zone. Like, that just gives me the chills that we are able to be there. And the Ukrainian ambassador to the US was at our event last night. And she just said, we love Peace Corps. Like, what can I do? What can I do to, help people understand what it means even to have virtual service and to have Peace Corps a part of this? And so that's a game changer. I don't know what it can mean long term. We're going to keep, fighting to keep that, presence alive. in a place that's very challenging. So it's, it's a really exciting time, I think, during or sort of coming out of COVID. Every organization has had to ask themselves, how do we dig deep? How do we become better? How do we change? How do we, adapt? And a lot of the things that we're thinking about really do address some of the equity and ownership issues at a more structural level. Again, it will take time. But I'm just excited, and it's been an all of agency effort. Everyone contributing through the strategic plan and through all of the working groups and everything else. And it's a very inspiring time right now as we build back up, and with everybody thinking about how we seize this opportunity to just always be better.
Well, I'm appreciating part of what you're saying is the diversification of how Peace Corps operates.
Yes.
And, I go way back in traditions, but when we were looking at the virtual program, it was, oh my heavens, how do we honor the 3 goals? How do we honor the mission? But here we are. This is who we are. This is what IT gives us. This is what COVID gives us. But I'm excited to hear that we need to keep on. What can we be today? Because what we can be today can be very different and very exciting in its own way. Very quickly, how are the countries themselves responding to us returning? And do we feel comfortable that Congress is behind us and working along? Let's start with the countries, then quickly with Congress.
So we have received overwhelmingly positive support. So we have asked every country before we've started inviting volunteers to go back, do you want us? And, they have been asking and asking and asking, when are you coming back? So that's great. And we have a backlog of 12 formal invitations from countries that want Peace Corps to re-enter, or for new Peace Corps programs. And I think it reflects just how difficult COVID has been, and also at a broad country level, what it means. It means something to have volunteers in country, and it means something bigger than just the volunteer in their service. The symbolism, the commitment, the fact that Americans care enough to go and be a part of them, especially after this period of isolation and divisiveness, is powerful. And as I have said all week, we are trying to shout it from the rooftops. We want to get people back out there. And that is my plea to all of you, is to do everything you can to share the word and, get people out so we can, get over this period of sort of holding back. And that is why we're launching a new campaign. It is a bold invitation. It has energy behind it. It has a lot of passion and strength behind the campaign itself. So, that's just, it's been incredible to see and hear, and to be with, leaders who are saying, please, please, please come back. You are part of us. You're part of the fabric of our country. Or they're saying, you are so important, to us as we move forward. And, we want 500 volunteers. We want 1,000. You probably know, Jody, because this started also during your tenure. Uzbekistan is a country that has invited us back, and they would like 10,000 volunteers. I think Mongolia wants 1,000, and Vietnam, which we were so excited to be able to swear in the first group of volunteers there. And that is an effort that has spanned so many country directors. And I think the one person who's been on it the whole time is Leanne Galloway, who was in our general counsel's office. And, when we were there, we crowned Leanne RPCV Group 0 from Vietnam because she's the only one. But, even there, they were saying, we'll start small. But then the ambassador came and said, we want to grow with you. So it's great that I will add one more thing before Q&A, and that is there was a beautiful article that came out in Korea, and we didn't know about it. It came to us, but it was honoring the legacy of Peace Corps in Korea in a Korean newspaper. And we'll be sure to get that to you. You can circulate it to the team because it is so beautiful and such a great relationship, an ongoing relationship that Peace Corps has had with the people of Korea.
Well, exciting. I'm going to ask you to one quick question, and then we'll open it up to questions that others have for you. If you had a piece of advice for all of us, what would it be?
Whew.
Younger women, but any of us will take the advice, but particularly for younger women.
That's always a question, and I wish I could see everybody's faces so I knew who was on the call, because the advice, it always depends on who one is talking to. And I'm seeing some amazing people I know and amazing leaders I know, and I feel a little cautious giving advice to people who I admire so much. Wow, I think that as women, sometimes we let fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of people not liking us, fear of a lot of things get in the way of, what we maybe think we're capable of, or, what our gut is telling us, or, all of those things. And my advice would be to really reflect on how might fear be holding you back. That's my advice.
Oh, that's great. Oh my, I'm going to think about that.
I think about it every day. I really do. And because it's, there are so many things that are nuanced. And then there are times, like I said before, you've got to just get up to the table and do something. And it's leaves you so vulnerable.
Well, and going back, holding on, don't let fear get in the way. That's a key phrase. And, when you said part of your energy and leadership comes from the gut, and often we're reluctant to trust our gut. But one of the ways to overcome that fear is to go with the gut and then just go.
Yeah.
All right. With that wonderful comment, we could skip the gut part, but don't let fear hold you back. I'm going to turn it to Shireen and Tristina for questions that others have for you. And as we ask the questions, just an extra thank you for being you.
Likewise.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're just looking at some of the questions that are rolling in. So again, if you haven't submitted in a question, please do in the chat. The first question that we have is a little bit about, you talked a little bit about how COVID has obviously affected Peace Corps today. But could you talk a little bit about, how are volunteers and staff working differently? How have kind of projects specifically changed in that post-COVID environment?
So there's so many different ways to answer that question. And I think from a just purely programmatic perspective, you can imagine that, there were all kinds of, logistical considerations and things about how we operate. But I think that if you look holistically, what I can say about the volunteers themselves, just listening to country directors, the people who are showing up right now are so committed. Some of them have waited years to be a part of the Peace Corps. And the staff, not having volunteers for several years, are so committed to the success of those volunteers and the communities. And the way that we are really trying to think differently about how we work really is thinking holistically about the Peace Corps network and the Peace Corps family. So Peace Corps is not just volunteers. It's not just 240,000 returned volunteers. Peace Corps is thousands of staff who know their communities inside and out, and some of them have been there for decades. It is host families, it is counterparts. It is this group of people who are really committed to grassroots development and to this ethos, right, by which sort of Peace Corps does its business. So to me, that's like the core, it's something that's been a part of us forever, right? But we're naming it in a different way and seeing how we can bring it to life in a different way so that the network itself, and you think about what's possible in this Zoom world, right? And we all hate the Zoom world, let's be honest. But it does open up these possibilities of coming together across countries and across communities, within countries. So really looking at how we can leverage that is something that, we're trying to innovate around, struggling with, and seeing how we can be more intentional about that, given the tools that we have post-COVID.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Another question that came in was, how can you address in practical terms how Peace Corps can increase diversity, equity, inclusion, particularly in countries where they may not be valued?
Great question. And the question about diversity, equity, inclusion is so layered. And I think the question is maybe more rooted in the host country, the experience of a volunteer coming into a host country. And I hope I got that right, because I will say from a recruiting perspective and an outreach perspective, there is tremendous emphasis on diversity of, all kinds, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, age diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientation, like all aspects. And there is very intentional, very specific outreach happening through minority serving institutions, and in other non-traditional places, right, for Peace Corps. And our applicant population at this point is about 41% people who self-identify as people of color. And that's great, but we're seeing, some of those folks drop off disproportionately along the journey. So we have work to do on that. With respect to the host country and the host community and what is the volunteers' experience, we've done a lot to train our staff to understand and celebrate the uniqueness of everyone who is coming into service, so that they can help to bridge, and that our training is strengthened around those bridges. We are also doing a lot with host families and others, really celebrating the diversity of Americans. And I know that can be hard, like really, really hard, when someone goes into a community and they say, well, you're not an American, or we expected someone different. That's devastating. So there's a lot of it that we have sort of within this realm of influence. And then there are all of the things that we can't control. What we are really aiming for is that we are able to achieve a culture within Peace Corps of belonging, that everyone has that sacred sense of belonging to something that is incredibly special, and that we are all welcomed and embraced in the full totality of our multiple identities and how we show up. And we're going to keep pushing, for that, both within Peace Corps and to the extent that we can influence it within the communities where we're placing volunteers. It's important.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that. I know it's not an easy one to answer in, 1 or 2 minutes or less. So we appreciate that. Another question came in about virtual service opportunities and whether those will still be available in countries that have reopened or just available in places that have yet to be back. For example, Madagascar, someone who is within the Friends of Madagascar, our PCV group is interested to know.
Mm-hmm. So each country is approaching this a little bit differently based on sort of their staff composition and what the needs are. And we've seen some really, really creative utilization of virtual service to complement in-person service. And there's a great example from Peru where there was a response volunteer who was conducting some trainings for teachers, and the virtual volunteer was observing people teach. And the virtual volunteer was, an expert, and I forget exactly what if it was literacy or what the actual technical skill was. But the virtual volunteer was then able to provide one-on-one coaching sessions in a very technical area as a follow-up observation. So it is my hope that we continue to leverage those technical skills in very targeted and clear ways, because it's an amazing opportunity for people who may not be able to serve. Otherwise, not everybody can leave the US and go overseas. And it provides tremendous value to the host communities. And that's what we're hearing. It's still, a form of service that is unique. So we sort of consider ourselves still in this pilot phase. We love it. We think it has tremendous potential in places like Ukraine, but it also has tremendous potential with bringing some really advanced technical skills from people, who can do amazing things. So that's where we are at this moment. The future remains to be seen. But if you are someone who wants to serve virtually and isn't seeing a virtual assignment, I encourage you to reach out, to the virtual service team and see if there's something that makes sense for you, potentially in another country, or, letting the country teams know that there's interest out there.
Does that suggest that it can be part of people who were not been Peace Corps volunteers in the country before?
So we're examining how we can do that. And because it's currently under our gift acceptance authority, which is, the way it was designed, Jody, under your leadership.
To get around a few rules.
The question is what kind of due diligence do you need to do on people? So do they have to go through a full legal clearance? Things of that nature that, can bog the system down if it's not, done in a way that really makes sense. So we're trying to figure out how to extend it beyond RPCVs. And those are just some of the really technical issues. There's no philosophical, the philosophical issue is just, how do you get people sort of in that ethos of Peace Corps, and if they haven't done it before and been through a full, PST or some modified PST, I think that's doable. But then there are also some of the other sort of more mechanical things.
I have one last question for you, Carol, or Dr. Spahn, and that is looking at the women in Romania and Malawi, how did they influence you as a leader in watching them in their communities?
Oh my goodness, they're so different, but I think the lessons are, just so similar. My counterpart at my first site in Malawi ended up starting a steel business, right? So something that was, a male dominated field around the world. And she really leaned into that and did some amazing things. And I'll talk about Ella, who you met as well, Jody, who was a woman from a village in Malawi who worked with 3 different volunteers, and the entire women's group she worked with just started business after business after business and opened a preschool and did all of these amazing things in their community. And I think that, when I was talking before about sort of leaning in and stepping up and being bold in your aspirations, those are some of the things that you see when you look at what women are doing in different ways, be it a big steel company or a small village, sort of mango drying and selling business. And it's powerful to watch, especially when women come together and support each other in the way that I've seen and really lift each other up. It's a very, very powerful force.
Well, thank you so much, Director Spahn. We're just at the end of our hour, so we apologize if we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, but we want to thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion and for being so authentic with us and candid with us about your experiences as a woman leader and also about Peace Corps. I also wanted to thank Jody for facilitating such a wonderful discussion. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we do hope that you'll join us for future programs. You can always go to our website and learn a little bit more. And thank you, of course, to Christina for helping with the production. So thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for staying engaged with Peace Corps. You all are amazing. Cheers.
There for you.
Thank
And
you. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks, Shireen. Appreciate it.